Good evening, my friends. I sit by the fire on a quiet night, and I have brought a book worth your time. Not a busy book, not a loud one. It is about influence, which is not quite what most people imagine it to be. And frankly, after reading this, you might wish you never had picked it up, because once you see these patterns, you cannot unsee them. You will walk into a grocery store and realize you have been played for a fool your entire life. Welcome. We think persuasion arrives as someone standing before us, speaking beautifully, making grand arguments. That is only the surface. In truth, influence often works in a much quieter way. It works because the human mind is busy, tired, distracted. It works because we are all trying to move faster than the world actually allows. We have approximately 17 seconds of genuine attention left in us, and that was before we checked our phones. So instead of examining each choice carefully from the ground up, we lean on signals, we trust shortcuts, we follow cues, and those cues can be triggered by someone who understands them, which is to say, by someone smarter than we are being in that particular moment, which is most moments. A man named Robert Cialdini did something unusual. He did not study what people say they believe. He studied what people actually do. He watched them when pressure was present, when habit was operating, when speed was demanded, when social expectation was quiet but persistent. He discovered something unsettling. We believe we are thinking freely, and often we are. But we are also being guided by invisible patterns that work before conscious thought has time to arrive. Patterns that have been perfected by people who have spent considerably more time studying you than you have spent studying yourself, which is not difficult. Most of us have spent 0 time studying ourselves and considerable time distracting ourselves from doing so. This book exposes those patterns, not to make you distrust everything, but to see clearly, to understand that behind many of our yeses lies not always reasoning, but something far more efficient, something the mind prefers to reasoning. Automation. The mind is lazy, you see. It prefers shortcuts. It prefers to follow the crowd. It prefers to say yes and move on, because saying no requires energy. Saying no requires thinking. And thinking, as we have established, is exhausting. Among all the forces that move human behavior, reciprocity is one of the oldest, perhaps the deepest. It is simple. When someone gives us something, we feel a pull to give something back. It may be a favor. It may be a gift, a compliment, a moment of attention, or simply a sample. Yet the result is often the same. We begin to feel that saying no is no longer a simple rejection. It starts to feel like something heavier, like a small violation of fairness itself, like ingratitude, like we are bad people, which of course is ridiculous. And yet, a free sample may taste small, but something happens inside. The feeling of owing something can start immediately. This is not always kindness at work. Sometimes it is, but not always. Sometimes it is a calculated strategy by someone who understands that your sense of fairness is a lever, a very effective lever. This is the genius of reciprocity. It rarely feels like force. It feels like manners, like basic fairness, like the way decent people conduct themselves. You tell yourself, they gave me something first. The mind quickly translates that into a quiet obligation. And once obligation enters the room, freedom does not disappear completely. but it becomes far more expensive to exercise. It becomes heavy. It becomes uncomfortable. It becomes something you would rather not think about. Which, let's be honest, is what we prefer anyway. In ordinary life, reciprocity holds communities together. Families depend on it. Friendship depends on it. But the same principle that helps communities stay generous can also be engineered, can be arranged into a system. And there the matter becomes unsettling. What feels warm and human can also be used strategically to lower resistance. What feels like kindness can also feel like a cage once you realize you are inside it. Reciprocity applies not only to gifts, it applies to concessions too. If someone asks for something large, then steps back to something smaller, your mind may read that as a favor. You feel they move toward you. And because they moved, you begin to feel you should move too. This is how negotiation can become psychological choreography. You are dancing without realizing you are dancing, and by the time you figure it out, you have already agreed to the terms. Let us be honest for a moment. This is why influence matters so deeply. The real danger is not that someone forces you. The real danger is far more subtle. It is that you begin to cooperate with the pressure while still calling it your own decision. You believe you are being nice. You believe you are being fair. You believe you are responding like a decent person ought to respond. And often, that is precisely the moment when your freedom is most fragile, because you are no longer defending yourself. You have become your own accomplice. Once a gift is received, a new relationship is formed. A balance appears. A script begins. And if you do not see that script clearly, you may end up following it without question. Following it as though it were your own idea. Following it as though you had autonomy. You didn't. Generosity creates structure. That is the first great lesson. This becomes dangerous when the structure is built intentionally by someone who understands that obligation is more powerful than joy. A server places an extra mint beside the check. A charity sends free address labels in the mail. A company gives you 30 days of access and calls it a gift. A salesperson offers genuine help before asking for your commitment. Each act seems harmless by itself, yet together they reveal a truth about human nature. We do not respond only to value. We respond to indebtedness. We are moved not only by gain, but by the debt we imagine we have incurred. And we will go to extraordinary lengths to settle that debt, even when settling it costs us more than not incurring it in the first place. Logic? Not involved. In America, reciprocity is everywhere. It has become woven into the ordinary fabric of commerce. A free consultation, a sample, a discount code, a trial period, a bonus book. Each one creates a small pressure to move toward yes. Not because you have reasoned your way there, but because the mind has registered a gift. And the mind prefers to remain in balance. The mind does not like owing things. It does not like the feeling of imbalance. So it acts, it says yes, it buys, it commits, just to feel okay again, just to settle the score. There is another force, just as powerful as reciprocity. It works more quietly, but no less effectively. It is the human desire to appear consistent. Once we say yes to something small, something shifts inside us. We begin to see ourselves through that action. And after that, the next yes often feels less like a new decision and more like proof that we are still the same person. We are not evaluating the new request. We are protecting our self-image. A small yes at the door can quietly prepare the mind for a larger yes later. This principle works not because people always think carefully. It works because people respond to the image they hold of themselves. If I sign a small petition, I may start to think of myself as a supportive citizen. If I click a simple box online, I may begin to think of myself as interested, involved, committed. And once that self-image is engaged, it becomes very expensive to contradict it. Saying no now means saying, I am not who I thought I was, which is a fundamentally unsettling experience. And once identity enters the picture, consistency becomes a form of self-defense. Disagreeing with myself feels uncomfortable, so I protect my earlier choice. I defend it. I search for reasons why it was good. I do not abandon it easily. I cannot abandon it easily, because abandoning it means admitting I was wrong. And admitting I was wrong means I am not who I thought I was. And that is a kind of death. A small death, but a death nonetheless. A small initial commitment can open the door to much larger requests. First, the request is easy, reasonable, harmless. Then comes the second step. By then, refusing no longer feels like rejecting a stranger. It feels like contradicting your own earlier self. What was once a simple choice has quietly become a question of character. And character, you see, is sacred. We will defend it at almost any cost. We will defend it even when it is costing us. Good morning again, my friends. We have begun to see how the mind builds walls around its own choices. Once people commit, they often stop asking what is true. They start defending what is already theirs. The question changes. It is no longer, is this a good decision? It becomes, how do I remain consistent with the decision I already made? At that moment, intelligence does not disappear. It gets recruited into self-justification. Your mind, which could be thinking, is now defending. Which could be growing, is now protecting. The commitment grows even stronger when it is active, public, and written down. A thought inside the head can still drift away, but a spoken promise, a signed form, or a visible declaration begins to harden. Now the pressure is no longer only internal, it becomes social. Other people have seen it. That makes reversal feel heavier. The cost of changing your mind rises, because changing your mind now means admitting you were wrong in front of witnesses. And that is a social death. A small social death, but a death nonetheless. What makes this principle so powerful is that it disguises pressure as character. You think you are being dependable. You think you are being firm. You think you are honoring your word. And sometimes that is exactly true. But other times, consistency becomes the rope by which a clever system gently pulls you forward while you call it integrity, while you defend the noose as honor. The first yes is rarely the whole decision. It is often the beginning of a chain. A tiny promise can reshape identity. A public statement can harden loyalty. A small commitment can make a larger one feel inevitable. Before long, what once seemed too much begins to feel merely consistent with what has already been accepted. You have become a different person. You did not notice the moment it happened, but you did. And now you are defending this new person fiercely, even if this new person makes decisions that the old you would have rejected. Now, we come to one of the most powerful forces in all of human behavior. When people are uncertain, They often look outward before they look inward. They watch what others are doing, what others are buying, what others seem to believe. And in that moment, the crowd stops being background noise. It becomes evidence. It becomes proof. It becomes the truth. Because if so many people cannot be wrong, then what are we to do but follow? What are we but lone voices in a chorus that is already decided? This is the promise of social proof. If many people are doing something, the mind starts to treat that behavior as information, not perfect information, but usable information. The crowd seems to reduce uncertainty. It whispers that so many people cannot all be wrong. And because uncertainty is uncomfortable, that whisper often becomes enough. That whisper becomes conviction. That whisper becomes fact. A long line outside a restaurant can make strangers assume the food is worth the wait. They may know nothing about the cooking, but they know people are waiting. And that knowledge, thin as it is, becomes persuasive, becomes irresistible, becomes reason enough to wait. In modern life, social proof does not live only in crowds. It lives on screens, star ratings, customer reviews, bestseller badges, view counts, follower numbers. A product with 10,000 reviews seems safer than one with 12. A video with millions of views feels more trustworthy than one that may in fact be wiser, but remains unseen. Because wiser is invisible, and invisible is not convincing. Numbers are convincing. Numbers are democratic. Numbers feel like truth. Social proof becomes strongest when the situation is unclear, when quality is difficult to judge, when risk is present, when time is short. In such moments, the behavior of others becomes a substitute for understanding. We stop asking, "What is true?" We start asking, "What are people like me doing here?" And the answer to that question becomes our answer. We become followers in a world of followers, all of us following someone who is also following someone else, a chain of the blind leading the blind. And somehow, we have convinced ourselves that this is wisdom. We are influenced most strongly, not by just any crowd, but by a relevant crowd. People who seem similar to us carry unusual persuasive power. Same age, same neighborhood, same profession, same worries, same aspirations. When their behavior mirrors our identity, their choices begin to feel less like observation and more like instruction, less like coincidence and more like inevitability, less like choice and more like fate. Yet social proof carries a great danger. The crowd can guide, yet the crowd can also mislead. Many people may follow not because they understand, but because they are copying one another. In such moments, behavior spreads faster than truth. False certainty can start to feel like common sense. A shared delusion can become a shared reality. History is full of crowds that were absolutely certain and absolutely wrong. You can see this in meetings. A proposal is introduced. A few people nod. A few more nod, because others already have. Very soon, the room begins to treat agreement as proof. Yet what may actually be happening is far less noble. People are not evaluating the idea. They are evaluating the momentum around the idea. People are not thinking. They are following. They are performing agreement. They are pretending they understand because everyone else is pretending they understand. The mind prefers to align with others rather than stand apart. This is not stupidity. It is efficiency. It is the mind's way of reducing the burden of judgment. But efficiency can also be exploited. Safety can also be a trap. The tendency to follow can become the tendency to be led. Obedience can become habit. Habit can become identity. And identity can become a prison. The lesson is not that other people are useless guides. The lesson is that the crowd must never replace your judgment. Social proof can save time, reduce fear, and simplify choices. But it can also smuggle error into the mind under the comforting disguise of consensus. And that disguise is very comforting indeed, which is why so many people accept it. Which is why consensus, true or false, has such power over us. Good evening once more, my friends. We now arrive at a principle so ordinary that most people fail to notice how powerful it really is. We prefer to say yes to people we know and like. And because that truth feels warm and harmless, it often slips past our defenses without resistance. And we have very little resistance left. We have already used it all up being suspicious of things that do not matter. We have no energy left to defend ourselves against things that do. A friendly face can lower your guard before a single real argument has even been made. This principle works because the mind is always blending judgments together. If we like the person, we begin to feel better about the request. If we enjoy the interaction, we become more open to the proposal. And before long, we may mistake personal warmth for actual credibility. We may mistake comfort for competence. We may mistake friendliness for honesty. And often, that is precisely when we are most vulnerable. One reason liking becomes persuasive is similarity. We trust people who seem like us, the same generation, the same neighborhood, the same hobbies, the same way of moving through the world. When someone feels familiar, the request no longer arrives as a cold transaction. It arrives wearing the clothes of kinship. It feels like a friend asking a favor. And who would say no to a friend? Who would want to be the kind of person who says no to a friend? Another path into liking is praise. A compliment may feel small, but it changes the emotional temperature of a conversation very quickly. Even when people suspect flattery, they often still respond to it. The words may touch the surface, but the warmth settles deeper, and that warmth can become a gateway through which a request can enter, a gateway through which a yes can travel. And once a yes has been said, it is very hard to unsay it. This is where matters grow delicate. A compliment may be sincere, but sincerity is not guaranteed merely because the feeling is pleasant. A skilled persuader understands that admiration softens resistance. Once you feel seen, appreciated, and emotionally welcomed, your standards may quietly become less severe. Your vigilance eases. Your questions become gentler. Your defenses drop. And in that moment of openness, anything can slip through. Modern persuasion has perfected this principle through public figures and online personalities. A familiar face, a charming voice, a polished lifestyle. And suddenly, the product feels wrapped in borrowed trust. The audience does not only see the item being sold, they see the person they admire standing beside it. And the admiration begins to spill over onto the object itself. This is why endorsements work so well. The logic is often weak, yet the emotional bridge is strong. And a weak bridge, if it is the only bridge, becomes a very strong bridge indeed. If the audience already likes the messenger, the message gets a smoother path into the mind. Liking becomes a delivery system for agreement. It becomes a vehicle. It becomes a Trojan horse. The gift horse arrives at the gate, looking beautiful. And we open the gates. We welcome it inside. We celebrate its arrival. And only later do we wonder why we are surrounded by soldiers. So be careful, my friends. A pleasant person may still carry a poor idea. A charming speaker may still offer a weak bargain. A familiar face may still be asking for more than the situation deserves. The question is not whether you enjoy the person. The question is whether the request would still make sense if presented by someone plain, unknown, and unremarkable. Strip away the charm, remove the warmth, take away the smile, and ask yourself, does this still make sense? If the answer is no, then you have found your answer. Liking is not proof. Warmth is not evidence. Charm is not truth. Remember this when you feel most comfortable. Remember this when the person seems most kind. Remember this when you are about to say yes, because that is the moment when liking is most dangerous. That is when it has done its work. That is when you are most likely to mistake personal warmth for logical truth. And in our next part, we will meet a force even older and often even harder to resist. Authority. For many people, a title, a uniform, or a symbol of expertise can command obedience before thought has time to speak. This is a deep pattern in human nature. We are built to defer to those who appear to know. We are built to submit. We are built to follow. And we have dressed this up as respect. We have called it deference. But what it really is abdication. It is the abdication of responsibility. It is the handing over of power. There is a force that can move human beings with astonishing speed. A title, a uniform, a confident voice, a framed credential on the wall. And suddenly, many people stop examining the message itself. They begin instead by trusting the person who delivers it. This is not deliberation. This is automaticity. This is the mind saying, I do not have to think about this. Someone else has already thought about it, and that someone else is wearing a white coat. So I will just do what they say. A white coat can create trust before the mind has even tested the words being spoken. This is not imagination. This is what happens in the mind when authority is present. We do not even realize we are doing it. We feel simply safer, more assured, less burdened, as though a weight has been lifted, as though someone else has agreed to carry the burden of thinking. And what a relief that is. What a beautiful relief. This principle works because authority simplifies uncertainty. If someone appears qualified, the brain feels less pressure to investigate every detail for itself. The symbol of expertise becomes a shortcut. And a shortcut, once accepted, can feel almost as solid as evidence. A symbol can become reality. A title can become competence. An appearance can become truth. In ordinary life, authority appears everywhere. In hospitals, in law offices, in financial firms, in schools, in corporate boardrooms. A person with a polished title and a practiced tone may receive trust long before trust has actually been earned. And because the performance looks orderly, the obedience often feels reasonable. And reasonable is what we want. We want to believe we are being reasonable. We want to believe we are following authority because it has earned that authority, not because we are too tired or too afraid or too uncertain to think for ourselves. Here is the danger. Status symbols can borrow the appearance of truth without containing truth itself. A large office A serious expression? A luxury watch? Technical language? Official credentials? All of these may create a powerful impression, but impression is not proof. A suit does not make you wise. A title does not make you right. A diploma does not make you honest. And yet, we treat these things as though they do. We treat them as though they were truth itself. The deepest power of authority is not that it argues brilliantly. It is that it encourages surrender. Once a figure appears qualified enough, many people stop asking, "Is this correct?" They begin asking something far more passive. Am I supposed to comply? And that shift, that small shift from examination to obedience, is the victory. That is when authority has won. Authority can also be performed through language, a calm tone, technical vocabulary, polished delivery, visible confidence. All of these can suggest competence. The audience may not fully understand what is being said, yet the style of speaking itself creates reassurance. That reassurance can become obedience dressed as understanding. That reassurance can become agreement disguised as comprehension. Not all authority is genuine. Some of it is borrowed. Some of it is theatrical, a costume, a badge, a carefully staged background, a curated biography. And suddenly, a stranger can appear to deserve more trust than the facts would justify. A stranger can become an expert. An expert can become a savior. And a savior can ask anything. So when you encounter authority, pause before you kneel to it. Ask whether the claim stands on evidence or merely on presentation. Ask whether the title is relevant to the decision at hand. Ask whether the person would still convince you if they were wearing jeans instead of a suit. If the answer changes, then you have found your weakness. And now you know where the pressure will come from. Respect for expertise is wise. Blind surrender is not. The mind prefers clarity, but not so much that it abandons all questions. The mind prefers certainty, but not at the cost of thinking. The mind prefers to feel safe, but not at the cost of freedom. Good evening, friends. And now we arrive at one of the fastest forces in all of persuasion, scarcity. When something appears limited, rare, or close to disappearing, the human mind begins to value it differently. Not always because the thing itself has changed, but because access to it has changed. And once access feels threatened, desire often begins to rise. Not desire for the thing, desire to prevent loss, to prevent the pain of missing out, to prevent the regret. A ticking countdown can make people rush before they have fully decided what they truly want. This is the subtle power of scarcity. The product may be the same as it was yesterday, the quality unchanged, the usefulness unchanged. Yet the moment supply appears to shrink, the item begins to feel more precious. We do not merely imagine gaining it. We begin imagining the pain of losing the chance. We begin experiencing loss before loss has even occurred. We grieve for opportunities we never had. That is why scarcity can be so deceptive. We often confuse rarity with quality. We assume that if something is harder to get, it must also be better, more important, more rewarding. Sometimes that is true. But often the increase is not in actual value. It is in emotional pressure, in the hurrying of the mind, in the compression of time. Scarcity does not only increase desire, it also threatens freedom. When people sense that an option may soon disappear, they often react not just with interest, but with resistance against the loss itself. Loss feels heavier than gain. We move to prevent it. We move quickly. We move without thinking. We move as though our freedom itself is at stake. And in a sense, it is. Once the option disappears, we can never choose it again. Opportunity becomes opportunity lost. Choice becomes impossibility. This is why so many people purchase in haste. This is why so many people purchase in haste. They believe they are moving toward value, when in truth, they may simply be running from loss. The mind says, act now. Decide now. Do not let it slip away. And under that kind of pressure, the future begins to disappear. There is only the shrinking window. There is only the countdown. There is only the moment, and then there is nothing. Modern platforms have learned to weaponize scarcity with great elegance. Only 3 left. Sale ends tonight. Last seats available. Offer expires in 12 minutes. These phrases do more than describe inventory. They shape emotion. They compress time. And once time feels compressed, reflection becomes much harder. The mind that would normally pause now finds itself hurrying instead. The mind that might normally ask questions now finds itself simply complying. Saying yes before thinking the question through. Scarcity becomes even stronger when joined to the other principles we have already studied. A limited offer endorsed by an expert feels more urgent. A nearly sold-out product with thousands of positive reviews feels safer. A special invitation from someone charming feels harder to resist. The principles stack. They reinforce each other. They create a psychological environment in which yes becomes almost inevitable, in which no becomes almost impossible. So how do we defend ourselves? We slow the clock. We ask a brutal question. If this were still available tomorrow, would I want it just as much? If the countdown vanished, would the product remain valuable? If the urgency were removed, would the reasons still stand? In many cases, what disappears first is not the offer, it is the illusion. The urgency fades, the pressure eases, and we realize we do not actually want it at all. Thus, scarcity teaches a hard lesson. People do not always chase what is best. They often chase what is about to vanish. We are running from loss more than we are running toward gain. We are being moved by fear more than by desire. And that fear, that ancient fear of missing out, can override almost any other consideration, can override logic, can override prudence, can override our better judgment. Good evening once more, my friends. We must now rise above the individual principles and look at the machine they create together. A clever persuader rarely depends on only one force. He does not rely only on liking, or authority, or scarcity by itself. He builds a sequence, a system, a psychological corridor through which the mind is gently guided until yes begins to feel less like a choice and more like the natural next step, more like inevitability, more like destiny. Think of it this way. First, someone becomes likable. Then the crowd seems to approve. Then an expert appears to validate. Then a gift lowers resistance. And finally, urgency closes the window. By the end, the mind no longer feels it is standing before 6 separate arguments. It feels surrounded by one single emotional climate pointing in one direction. All the signals are aligned. All the forces are working together. The path forward is clear, and there is no path backward. This is what makes modern influence so elegant. It does not always feel aggressive. It feels smooth. It feels personalized. It feels as if the world is simply arranging itself around your preferences. It feels like coincidence. It feels like luck. It feels like you're being given exactly what you want at exactly the right moment. Yet beneath that comfort may lie a carefully planned sequence whose true purpose is not to help you think, but to help you comply. Not to give you what you want, but to give you what someone else wants you to want. Design is never merely visual when persuasion is involved. Placement matters. Color matters. Order matters. Which signal appears first matters. A smiling face near the top may soften the visitor. A review count may reassure him. A timer may pressure him. The page itself becomes a silent salesman. It is arguing without words. It is persuading without language. It is speaking directly to emotion and bypassing thought entirely. And now, my friends, we arrive at the moment most people call buying. Yet buying is rarely a single moment. It is usually the final visible step in a longer invisible process. Before the wallet opens, attention has been guided, trust has been borrowed, resistance has been softened, and urgency has been carefully arranged. The purchase is often not the beginning of influence. It is the harvest. It is the culmination. It is the moment when the system completes itself and you cooperate with your own persuasion. The final click may feel spontaneous, but the decision was often prepared long before checkout. A skilled sale does not begin by proving the product. It begins by preparing the buyer. First comes attention, then comfort, then relevance, then trust, then the sense that action is both safe and timely. Then, finally, when all the pieces are in place, comes the sale. By that point, you are not really choosing. You are following a script that someone else wrote. Very often, a purchase is preceded by a favor, a free consultation, a bonus guide, a sample, helpful attention. These gestures seem to belong to kindness, and sometimes they do, but they also create a subtle atmosphere in which refusal begins to feel less comfortable than before. After receiving sincere help, many people find it harder to walk away without buying anything. It feels rude. It feels ungrateful. It feels like a violation of the reciprocity script. People like to believe they compare options objectively, but options are often presented inside a frame designed to influence what feels reasonable. One item is made to look premium. Another is made to look safe. Another is made to look cheap but undesirable. The arrangement itself begins to shape the decision before deliberate thought has fully arrived. You are not comparing. You are being guided. You are not choosing. You are being nudged. And the nudge is so gentle that you feel like you are still in control. Good evening again, my friends. We now enter the second half of our journey. In the first half, we examined how influence guides people toward yes. But now, we must ask something more unsettling. What happens after the yes has already been given? For the human mind does not merely make decisions. It begins to organize identity around them. It tells stories about them. It defends them. It becomes invested in them. The sale may be finished, but the mind often keeps working long after the money is gone. Once people commit, they do not simply move on. They begin to explain themselves to themselves. They search for reasons. They strengthen the story. They reinterpret doubts in a kinder light. Doubt becomes inconvenient. So it is softened. Doubt becomes a challenge to overcome, not a warning to heed. This is the true genius of commitment. A person does not merely say, "I bought this." He begins to say, I am the kind of person who values this. She does not merely say, I joined that program. She begins to say, I am someone who takes growth seriously. The decision becomes a mirror. And then the mirror starts speaking back. The mirror tells you who you are. The mirror becomes you. That is why modern persuasion so often sells more than a product. It sells a version of the self. Buy this, and you are wise. Join this, and you are serious. Choose this, and you are discerning, responsible, prepared, or ahead of others. The offer becomes an identity costume, hanging quietly beside the price tag. And once you have put on that costume, it becomes very hard to take it off. And here, the machinery of influence reaches a higher elegance. Once identity is engaged, the persuader no longer needs to push as hard. The person begins to defend the choice voluntarily. He explains it to friends. He repeats it to himself. He looks for confirming evidence. He avoids contradicting evidence. The system is now being maintained from within. The system has become internalized. You are no longer being persuaded. You are persuading yourself. There comes a moment when influence no longer feels like influence at all. It feels like routine. It feels like habit. It feels like the ordinary way things are done. And that is the moment when persuasion reaches one of its highest forms, for the mind is no longer resisting, debating, or even consciously agreeing. It is simply continuing. It is on autopilot. It is locked in. What was once a decision can quietly become a default that continues without fresh attention. This is how automatic compliance grows, not through constant pressure, but through repetition. The same path is taken enough times that the path itself begins to feel legitimate. Familiarity starts replacing examination. Continuation starts replacing evaluation. You are not thinking anymore. You are just continuing. And continuing feels like choosing, even when it is not. At the beginning, a person says yes. Later, he may no longer need to say yes at all. He simply does not interrupt the process. He does not cancel. He does not question. The old agreement continues moving forward on borrowed momentum, and the mind mistakes that momentum for endorsement. The mind says, I must want this. Otherwise, I would have stopped. But the truth is, you stopped questioning long ago. You stopped interrupting because it became easier not to. A system does not always need to make compliance attractive if it can make exit inconvenient. A confusing menu, a hidden setting, a tedious cancellation path. In such cases, the person may remain not because the choice is good, but because stopping requires more energy than drifting along. Because stopping requires consciousness. Because stopping requires effort. And effort is the one thing we are trying to avoid. This is a great secret of modern influence. The first agreement matters, yes. But the greater prize is continuity. The first yes opens the door, but the 1,000 quiet yeses that follow, the ones you do not even notice you are giving, those are the victory. Those are where the real value lies. Those are what you are really paying for. Good evening, my friends. We step now into one of the most intimate chambers of influence. There comes a point when repeated behavior no longer feels like behavior. It begins to feel like character. A pattern becomes a preference. A routine becomes a value. What was slowly trained from the outside begins to be defended as though it were born entirely from within. What was imposed becomes identity. What was arbitrary becomes you. The mind has a powerful tendency to explain itself. If I repeatedly choose something, I begin to assume the choice reveals my nature. I do not merely say, I have done this many times. I begin to say, this is just who I am. In this way, repetition becomes autobiography. Habit becomes identity. Behavior becomes essence. You are no longer someone who does this. You are someone who is this. This is why influence can become so difficult to detect. It no longer looks like pressure. It looks like taste. It looks like standards. It looks like personal conviction. A person may defend a carefully cultivated preference as though it emerged freely, when in fact it was shaped through exposure, affirmation, repetition, and reward. The hand on the tiller is no longer visible. The steering has become invisible. You think you are steering yourself, when in fact you are being steered. Identity grows even stronger when it is socially mirrored. If people like me choose this, admire this, join this, or avoid that, then my preference begins to feel confirmed not only inwardly, but publicly. The self is reinforced by the tribe. And once belonging is involved, disagreement becomes heavier. Disagreement becomes exile. Disagreement becomes death. And so you agree. You conform. You become indistinguishable from the crowd that is indistinguishable from you. Notice how the principles begin working together. Authority tells you what the respectable person chooses. Liking tells you what the charming person enjoys. Social proof tells you what your peers embrace. Scarcity tells you what discerning people secure. The result is not merely a purchase. It is a script for the self. It is an identity. It is a way of being. And once you are being this way becomes you. Once a decision becomes tied to identity, questioning the decision can feel like questioning the self. So a free mind must learn a difficult art. It must separate preference from programming. It must ask, do I truly value this? Or have I merely become accustomed to valuing it? Do I really believe this reflects my character? Or have I been gently taught to wear it as my character? Do I actually want this? Or have I just stopped noticing that I am not choosing? The wisest people are not those who never form identities. They are those who revisit them. They understand that some preferences were chosen, while others were absorbed. Some values were examined, while others were inherited from repetition and atmosphere. A mature mind does not worship every familiar impulse. It interviews it. It questions it. It does not assume that if it feels like me, then it must be me. To resist manipulation, you need not become hard. You need only become awake. The inner gatekeeper does not shout no at everything. It asks questions. What exactly is being offered? What emotion is being activated? What would remain convincing if the pressure were removed? What would I still want if nobody was watching? A wise person keeps certain questions ready. Would I still want this tomorrow? Would I still trust this without the title? Would I still choose this if no one else approved? Would I still care if the timer disappeared? When such questions become habitual, manipulation loses much of its speed. The system requires speed. It requires momentum. It requires you to not think. So learn to think. Learn to pause. Learn to interrupt the script. Another part of inner government is environmental discipline. If you know certain signals weaken you, reduce your exposure to them. Sometimes the wisest decision is made before temptation even appears. Sometimes the best defense is simply to not walk into the room where you will be persuaded, to not click on the email, to not scroll through the feed, to not look at the window. Sometimes the best defense is a deliberate and boring refusal to participate in the system at all. And so, my friends, we arrive at the final chamber of this long and revealing journey. We began with techniques, signals, and hidden levers of persuasion. But we do not end there. We end with a far more serious question. What kind of person can live in a world full of influence and still remain inwardly their own? What kind of person can see the machinery and not be crushed by it? What kind of person can understand persuasion and still choose freely? Let us be honest for a moment. No one is meant to live untouched by influence. We are shaped by teachers, by parents, by friends, by examples, by stories, and by love. The question is not whether you will be moved. The question is whether you will be moved by truth, or merely by pressure dressed in the costume of truth. The question is not whether you will be influenced. The question is who gets to do the influencing, you or everyone else. The machinery has been revealed. The vulnerabilities have been named. The defenses have been drawn. What remains is not another technique, but a final orientation of the soul. A free mind is not one that hears no pressure. It is one that chooses what may enter. It is one that knows the difference between temptation and truth, between manipulation and meaning, between a yes that is coerced and a yes that is given. You may still be kind. You may still appreciate help. You may still enjoy warmth, beauty, and connection. But appreciation need not become obedience. Gratitude need not become surrender. The strongest boundary is often a gentle one, clearly held. You can say thank you without saying yes. You can accept kindness without surrendering autonomy. You can enjoy beauty without losing yourself in it. No human being can become completely untouched by influence, nor should he wish to. We learn from one another. We are moved by love, example, admiration, and trust. The goal is not immunity. The goal is awareness. To know when guidance is helping you think and when it is replacing your thinking. To know when you are following and when you are being followed. To know when yes is yours and when it is theirs. Remember the disciplines we have gathered along the way. Pause. Separate the signal from the substance. Delay the hurried decision. Revisit what has become automatic. Question what flatters you. Examine what reassures you too quickly. These are not small habits. They are the architecture of self-respect. They are the foundation of freedom. They are the difference between a life that you choose and a life that is chosen for you. I am Benjamin Franklin, and I leave you with this. In a world full of forces competing for your yes, the rarest power is still the quiet strength to decide with your eyes open. The strength to say no to what you do not want. The strength to say yes to what you do want. The strength to know the difference. And the wisdom to know that this strength is worth protecting, is worth fighting for, is worth keeping alive no matter what. Because once you lose it, once you hand it over, once you stop deciding and start accepting, it becomes very hard to reclaim. It becomes invisible. It becomes impossible. It becomes someone else's life that you are living. And that, my friends, is the darkest persuasion of all. So go forth. Open your eyes. Watch the patterns. Understand the machinery. See how you are being moved. And then, knowing all of this, still choose, still feel, Still say yes when yes is what you mean. Still say no when no is what you need. This is the final resistance. This is the final freedom. This is the only choice that actually matters. Farewell, my friends. The fire is burning low. The night is deep. And you have a decision to make. Will you let the patterns control you? Or will you control them? That choice, that final choice, belongs entirely to you.